So a couple years ago I did a My Thoughts on video covering the game War Thunder, which is a vehicular combat simulation game by Gaijin Entertainment that has been out since 2013 or so and is still going fairly strong to this day as I'm recording this video in July of 2024. And that's probably because there really isn't much competition for it. The only other games that come kind of close to what War Thunder does are World of Tanks and World of Warships, both of which are separate games, whereas War Thunder includes tanks, aircraft, and naval combat all in one game. So when you compare all of those, something like War Thunder ends up comparing pretty favorably, both because of the quite accurate simulation elements and the fact that it's got all of that included into one game instead of having to split your time and potentially money across multiple different games. And there's even a bit of interplay between the aerial vehicles and the ground vehicles, so that's added bonus points there. But of course, if you want to know more about War Thunder specifically, you can check out my video on it. I'll go ahead and throw up the card thing on the screen here, and I'll go ahead and throw a link in the video description box as well, so you can just go straight to that video and check that out if you're interested. But of course, this video is about the game Enlisted, so why am I bringing up War Thunder? Well, for one, they are both published by Gaijin Entertainment, although Enlisted is developed by Darkflow Software rather than Gaijin themselves. And some of the stuff that applies to War Thunder also applies to Enlisted. So, what exactly is Enlisted? Well, like with War Thunder, which started out as specifically a World War II kind of simulation game, Enlisted is a World War II focused first-person shooter where you choose to play as one of four factions, which are the combined allied forces of the Americans and the British, the Soviet Union, the combined forces of the Germans and Italians, and the Japanese. Now, unlike War Thunder, which started out as a World War II focused simulation game and then moved on to start including Cold War vehicles and finally up to modern day vehicles, Enlisted is still firmly locked into World War II. Even if you go up to the highest tier of equipment available to you, you're still only dealing with World War II equipment. So for example, when you get to the maximum tier for the Germans, you're going to unlock things like the FG-42 or the STG-44 or things like that. And of course, in terms of vehicles, you would get into stuff like Tiger tanks. So that's the era we're dealing with here, but what exactly do they do with it? Well, Enlisted's big gimmick is that instead of just jumping into it and playing it like you would pretty much any other World War II first-person shooter, you instead control squads. So you jump into a match and you select whichever squad you want to spawn as, and while you will spawn as one of the soldiers, you can switch between any of the soldiers within the squad at any time, and otherwise can issue some basic hold this point orders so that they will go to a location and presumably hold that position and defend against anybody attacking it. Or at least that's the intention behind it, because all of the other members of your squad are bots, so you have to rely on the game's AI for them to do what you're hoping they'll do, and they almost never actually do what you want them to do. Instead, you'll tell them to hold the position, and then they'll just start wandering around that position and start quite literally jumping in and out of cover for no discernible reason. They will often ignore enemies that are standing right in front of them and let themselves get shot to pieces, and will just generally be a nuisance to the player no matter what they're doing. In the rare event they do actually start opening fire on the enemy, they will almost never actually hit them unless for whatever reason that particular enemy is standing still. And even then, the AI is still so bad that the shots will probably just go around that enemy instead of actually hitting them. And not only will they not use any kind of special equipment the squad might have, or throw grenades or anything like that on their own, you can't even order them to do that. In fact, what I've found is the most useful part of the way the squads function is for them to just simply be avatars for you to switch between before you have to go back into the respawn queue. And this is the case regardless of what type of squad it is. It could be a grenadier squad, a rifleman squad, anti-tank squad, anything really, and they will all behave the same and will all generally be completely useless. The only real exception there is when you spawn in as a vehicle squad, because everybody's within the vehicle, so you don't need to worry about where they're running off to. But then, of course, you have to worry about all the problems associated specifically with the vehicles, but don't worry, we'll get there in just a moment. So the squad AI is basically brain dead and useless and constantly gets in your way, but what about the actual squads themselves? Are they actually playing differently, or is it all just determining what type of weapons you're going to be using? Well, both, really. If you're playing as a rifleman squad, for example, that's your basic infantry squad, all they do is run around shooting at stuff. If you're playing as a recon squad, they're the ones that get access to snipers, which means that they get access to scoped rifles. Anti-tank squads get access to anti-tank rifles, and then later on other anti-tank weapons. Machine gun squads get access to machine guns, assaulter squads get access to submachine guns and assault rifles, but generally speaking, all of these squad types are limited to their combat roles. They do have a few slots that they can unlock later on in their progression that will give them some additional capabilities, but the fundamental role of those squads is purely based in their combat capabilities, meaning that it really is just a loadout choice for them. Medics, engineers, and radio operators, on the other hand, are a different matter entirely. Of these, medic squads are the least interesting. They can heal their teammates and they can throw down crates of medkits so that their team can replenish their medkits after they've used them. Radio operators are slightly more interesting because they can call in artillery barrages, and then engineers are the most different from all of the other classes because they can build various battlefield improvements, so they can place down ammo crates so your team can resupply their weapons, although, quick note about that, it only works for your own team's weapons. So if, for example, you pick up an enemy rifle because you ran out of ammo, you can't replenish ammo at your team's ammo crates for that picked up rifle. Anyway, other things they can do include putting down sandbags, meaning that you can place down additional cover that will protect people who sit behind it. You can place down tank traps to prevent enemy vehicles from getting into a specific spot. You can put down barbed wire, which will slow down anybody who moves through it and also cause damage to them in the process. And after leveling through the progression a bit and unlocking the ability to do this, you can also place down anti-aircraft weaponry as well as anti-tank cannons, although they're both emplacements, so you can't just move them around. But the most important ability the engineer has is to place down rally points. These serve as forward spawn points, and while they do have a sort of queue and cooldown timer system going, so you can't just constantly spawn in at the rally point, they are ultimately vital, especially for the attacking team, so that they can get back into the fight more quickly instead of having to run back from their initial spawn points to get to wherever the objective is. But even though it's especially important for the attacking team, it shouldn't be discounted for the defensive team either. They definitely benefit from having forward spawn points so they can get right back up to the point and defend it more easily. So out of all the various classes available to the player, I would say that engineers are the most important for your team's success, followed by radio operators, and from there you can make a smattering of different classes depending on whatever you might be going up against. And while most infantry are very limited in their ability to deal with enemy vehicles, that doesn't necessarily mean that vehicles are completely overpowered. They can still be defeated by any infantry that's able to get a TNT pack on that particular vehicle so that it detonates right on the vehicle itself, and more importantly, vehicles are not capable of capturing points. Only infantry are able to do that. So vehicles definitely take on a supplementary role in this. This is primarily an infantry combat game, but they happen to have tanks, as well as some other light vehicles and aircraft, in order to help to punch through the enemy's lines, so to speak. And that all probably sounds pretty cool until you start to run into the severe balancing problems that the game has. Now, it's always going to have some level of imbalance because each faction has their own selection of weapons that are going to stack up differently to one another. So, for example, while the bolt-action rifles all behave pretty much the same regardless of which rifle you're using, when you get into things like submachine guns, light machine guns, and eventually at the very end of the tech tree, stuff like the STG-44 assault rifle, you're going to run into a lot more variance. You're going to end up with weapons with much higher or lower rates of fire than one another. They might do comparable damage, but they might have significantly different recoil, or they might have wildly different accuracy spread, which is something else we'll get to here in a moment. And the amount of rounds in the magazines are also going to play a pretty significant role there. And then, of course, there are things like anti-tank weapons, which are going to vary wildly in effectiveness, not only based on which tier you're in and what you're unlocking, but also what kinds of vehicles you're going up against. So How do they try to balance all of this out? Well, you have 5 tiers in which you can unlock various bits of equipment and vehicles and so on. And what they've tried to do is keep the various items within each individual tier relatively comparable to one another. So, for example, if you are running around in Tier 1 as the combined US and British forces, your 1903 Springfields and Rising submachine guns and stuff like that are going to be pretty comparable to, say, the Axis's Kar 98 and Carcano rifles and MP28s and MP34s. Where things get a lot messier is when your matchup is the Axis versus the Soviets, because the Soviets get access to some really good submachine guns really early in the progression, meaning that they can basically just point said SMG in the general direction of an enemy squad, press and hold the fire button, and barely even bother controlling the recoil, certainly not aim down the sights, and they'll probably wipe out the entire enemy squad before that squad has a chance to react to them. That's not how the early game SMGs worked for the other factions, so the USSR just straight up has an advantage over them, at least in that regard, and that is a pretty significant advantage when, for example, storming a point or trying to hold a point, because a lot of those points are located in buildings where you're going to be engaging in CQB, and obviously somebody with a bolt-action rifle is going to have basically no chance against somebody with an SMG to begin with, let alone one that has a ridiculously high rate of fire, so that gets pretty rough. The Soviets also get access to some pretty decent tanks pretty early on in the progression, and by pretty decent, I mean their armor in particular is quite effective compared to most of your anti-tank options at that stage. So that definitely gets pretty frustrating, and it becomes pretty clear why the Soviets are one of the more widely played factions in the game, whereas the Axis are not, or at least they aren't currently. They used to be one of the more popular factions until a bunch of changes were made, and now barely anybody wants to play them. But as rough as the situation can be with the Axis, it's even worse if you're trying to play as the Japanese. Pretty much nobody plays the Japanese in this game, which means that you're going to be in a world of hurt when you try to play as them. Because a particularly nasty problem that this game has is that while it does try to keep these various tiers of equipment comparable, that gets thrown out the window whenever the matchmaking gets involved. Theoretically, the matchmaking is supposed to go as follows. Tiers 1 and 2 are thrown into matches together, Tiers 4 and 5 are thrown into matches together, and then Tier 3 is either up-tiered or down-tiered, depending on how many people are playing at any given time, basically just to fill matches. And you can probably see immediately where the problem is with that. Obviously, Tiers 4 and 5 have the best equipment in the game. Tiers 1 and 2 have the worst equipment in the game. This means that if a Tier 3 gets matched into Tier 1 and 2 games, then either they're at a straight-up advantage over the Tier 1 and 2 players, or if the Tier 1 and 2 players have gone far enough in the progression to where they have unlocked a few things, it can end up being a bit of a closer match, although the Tier 3 players are still going to be at an advantage. Meanwhile, if Tier 3 players are matched into Tier 4 and 5 matches, then they just get absolutely stomped on. So right off the bat, not only do you have the disparity in equipment between tiers themselves, but you have the matchmaking throwing these matches together that are going to result in unbalanced matches no matter what you do. And especially for players who are very early on in the progression, that is going to be extremely irritating, because you're going to feel like you're just getting absolutely stomped on and have absolutely no chance. By the same token, once you manage to get up to Tier 3, your matches just become a total coin flip. If you get up-tiered into Tier 4 and 5, then it's just going to be absolutely miserable, whereas if you get down-tiered, then you're probably going to have a much better time than the Tier 1 and Tier 2 players that you have an advantage over. But even if you completely ignore the down-tiering or up-tiering and just the tier system in general, your experience from match to match is still going to vary wildly depending on simply the teammates that you get placed with. You see, all of the game modes in Enlisted are objective-based. There's no team deathmatch, kill confirmed, anything like that. It's all objective-based modes, and it all centers around capturing points on the map. One of the modes is basically like domination, where you have 3 points on the map and both teams are fighting over all 3 points, and the longer your team holds these points and the more points they hold, the faster the enemy's reinforcement meter will deplete until eventually they run out of reinforcements and you win, or of course the reverse happens to you. There's also a mode where both teams are fighting over a single point on the map, and whenever a team captures that point, then the objective shifts to a different position on the map, and then both teams fight over that point. And if the team that lost the previous point manages to capture that point, then the action moves back to the original point, and then it can move forward into the other team's area, and so on and so forth. So the action can go back and forth across the map until one team either captures all of the points or runs out of reinforcement tickets. Then there are 3 modes where one team is explicitly the attacking team and the other team is explicitly the defending team. And these include one where the defending team is trying to defend 2 positions on the map, and the attacking team is trying to plant demolition charges at them, and if they manage to take out both of the points, then the action moves to the next sector of the map, and it repeats until eventually the attacking team manages to destroy all the objectives, or they either run out of time or more likely run out of reinforcement tickets. And then there's a similar mode to this where the attacking team is trying to capture 2 points within a sector, and then once they've done that, then the action moves to the next sector, and so on and so forth. But the difference there is that they don't have to plant a demolition charge, they just have to capture the point, and the defending team can actually recapture points as long as they're still fighting within the same sector. Once both points in a sector have been captured, then it moves on to the next sector. But as long as the attacking team hasn't captured both points within a sector, then the defending team can go back and re-secure the original point that they lost. And then there's a mode where the attacking team starts with 1,000 reinforcement tickets, and they need to capture each point on the map in sequence. Every time they capture a point, they get a fairly large amount of reinforcement tickets back, so it behooves them to continue capturing the points, otherwise they will run out of reinforcement tickets and inevitably lose. Otherwise, the match ends when the timer has expired or the attacking team manages to capture all the points. These are the main modes available in the game, although there is also apparently an armored train escort mode where the attacking team is trying to escort an armored train and the defending team is trying to stop them from doing that. But apparently the game doesn't let you play that mode outside of custom matches until you're at the very least in Tier 3, and it's mainly meant for Tier 4 and 5 players, so playing it as Tier 3 would be miserable. And more importantly, upon looking this up to figure out what the hell was going on with it and why I wasn't getting the Armored Train Escort mode, I found out that apparently pretty much everybody absolutely hates the Armored Train Escort mode, so maybe it's not such a bad thing that I didn't get a chance to mess around with that mode. But anyway, as far as all these various modes go, you notice that they're all objective-based, and since the size of the maps is rather large, and the general gameplay is all objective-based modes with combined arms gameplay and class-based gameplay, it means the teams have to work together in order to win. This is the kind of game where individual players' skill takes a backseat to teamwork, coordination, and communication, which of course means if the matchmaking places you with people who aren't doing those things, you're probably gonna lose and you're probably gonna have a pretty bad time. Thing is, in the entire time I was messing around with this game, the most communication that anybody did was marking where the enemies are located. Occasionally, somebody playing, say, a radio operator or a mortar crew would request the coordinates of enemies so that they could drop hellfire upon them. But other than that, it was just pinging where enemies are, and it makes sense when you think about it. The game literally will not allow you to request ammo until you're pretty much out of it, so you don't get people requesting ammo, and the only people who can provide ammo are engineers anyway. They place down ammo boxes on the map that people can resupply at. There's no point to requesting a medic because chances are you just die in one shot anyway, and even if you don't die in one shot, every single soldier can carry a med kit, so it doesn't really matter when you can just heal yourself. And absolutely nobody uses text or voice chat, so the only communication you're really going to get nearly the entire time you're playing this game is people pinging seeing where enemies are on the map, and that's if you're lucky. A lot of times they won't even do that. So pretty much every time you click the matchmaking button, you have to pray to RNGesus that the match you're about to play isn't going to be an absolutely miserable experience. And regardless of how that prayer is answered, you find very quickly that Enlisted really doesn't have a whole lot going for it mechanically. It's not necessarily a bad game per se, but in terms of the first-person shooting mechanics, it's pretty basic. You do have to compensate for projectile travel and bullet drop at very long ranges, but at most combat engagement distances, you just put your sights on the enemy or slightly in front of them, and you're going to hit them. And if you're using a bolt action or semi-automatic rifle, then you're probably going to drop an enemy in 1 or 2 shots at absolute most. That does change once you start messing around with light machine guns and submachine guns, however, because that's where they introduce very arbitrary inaccuracy. You'll be aiming down your sights, and you'll start firing, and your shots will just start careening all over the place in a cone of fire somewhere in the general direction of where you're pointing. Now, if you're using a light machine gun, then it's not as much of a problem because they still do rifle levels of damage, so you're going to drop an enemy in 1 or 2 shots. But SMGs are only going to do that if you get a headshot. So if you're using one of the SMGs that has a lower rate of fire, then that becomes considerably more irritating than if you're, say, the Soviets and running around with all of your SMGs having ridiculously high rates of fire and you can just hose the enemy down with them. Especially when you get later on in the progression and you start unlocking the drum magazines that give you tons of ammo before you have to reload. So the shooting mechanics overall just end up being quite uneven. They're not necessarily bad, but the bolt action and semi-automatic rifles feel mostly fine. Obviously, I'm not late enough in the progression to have unlocked any of the assault rifles, so I have no idea how those feel, but I would assume they feel more or less like submachine guns, but with harder hitting rounds. And the submachine guns and the medium and light machine guns all have arbitrary inaccuracy built into them, which means that even if you're taking single shots with them, the shots just go careening all over the place instead of actually going where you're aiming. Meanwhile, shotguns are absolutely devastating in close quarters, but once you get past about 20 meters or so, they become pretty much useless. And even if you're shooting an enemy at point blank with a pistol, the only way you're going to drop them quickly is if you get a headshot. Otherwise, you're going to have to waste your entire magazine on a single enemy. And between the mediocre sound effects, the downright clunky animations in a lot of cases, and the general mechanical feel of the weapons, the gunplay in Enlisted is serviceable at absolute best. It's not awful, but it's not particularly good either. Things get a lot messier once you throw in the vehicles, however. The thing you have to remember about Enlisted is that it's not War Thunder, which means that while it does have some simulation elements when it comes to the vehicle handling, it's definitely not as in-depth or certainly not as refined as the experience of War Thunder. Meaning that while controlling planes and tanks in War Thunder feels pretty good actually, in Enlisted they feel incredibly clunky. You see, with it being more of an infantry-focused game, they decided that instead of the third-person perspective you get when you're controlling vehicles in War Thunder, you have to do everything from first person. And that's fine, it's not like Enlisted is the first game to attempt to do that, but the actual controls for the vehicles just feel sluggish, unresponsive, and clunky, particularly when you're flying a plane. Obviously, you can get used to it after a while, but you never really feel like you have really good control over the aircraft. And when you're driving tanks around, not only are the turrets agonizingly slow to turn, or at the very least in the early game anyway, I don't know about later on, but it is incredibly easy to just get stuck on level geometry, even if it looks like something you could very easily move over. And when it comes to shooting at enemies either with the aircraft or the tanks, well, good luck with that, you're gonna need it. Tanks can switch between either HE rounds for use against infantry or AT rounds for use against other vehicles, and early on in the progression especially, they are quite often incapable of penetrating the armor of other vehicles, often even if you're shooting at the least armored parts of those enemy vehicles, which is basically shooting at them from the rear. Meanwhile, enemy infantry can just run up to you because you have absolutely no visibility whatsoever, toss a few TNT packs on your tank's hull, and suddenly you're a smoking ruin. Meanwhile, aircraft generally don't have to worry about that because the only anti-air weaponry in the entire game is the anti-air flak gun emplacements that the engineer class can put down after they've unlocked them, and pretty much nobody actually does that apparently except for me. So generally the aircraft get to just fly around the entire battlefield completely unimpeded except by potentially the other aircraft from the enemy team. Because sure, infantry can certainly try shooting at enemy aircraft with their small arms, but they're not gonna hit them, so there's not really much point to it, meaning that aircraft generally just get to run riot all over the enemy team, and it is not at all uncommon to see somebody hop into an aircraft and spend almost the entire match in it because nobody can take them down. Again, Enlisted is not War Thunder. You don't get to spawn in with, say, a Flakpanzer and be able to take down enemy aircraft that might be harassing your team, while also being able to switch to ground mode and then shoot at enemy vehicles so you can mark them for your team, or even just outright take out lighter armor vehicles. No, don't get any of that kind of thing in Enlisted. It's only light tanks, medium tanks, and heavy tanks that are meant to go up against either infantry or, of course, other tanks. So either you get lucky and your team spawns in with a pilot who will actually go after the enemy pilot and take them down, or you get lucky and have somebody playing engineer on your team put down an anti-air gun so you can actually deal with the damn things. So frankly, it's actually a good thing that the aircraft are so clunky to try to pilot in this game, because if they weren't, then people would just be able to completely curb stomp the entire enemy team with just a single aircraft, and there wouldn't be anything that the enemy team would be able to do about it. So the combined arms experience of Enlisted is also quite rough. But then, of course, there's the elephant in the room, something I've referenced several times throughout this video, and which not only permeates everything that I have talked about up to this point, but is also completely intertwined with this game's business model, and that is the progression system. So how does that work? Well, on the surface, it's actually quite simple and straightforward. In order to unlock something, whether it be a vehicle or a gun, you select it as your active research topic, and then you just start playing the game. As you play, you will earn two things. The first of these is research points. These go not only directly into your active research project, but you'll also get an amount as reserve research points, so to speak, so that you can spend those on accelerating research. The second thing you'll earn is the in-game currency of silver. More on that in just a moment. Once you've completed a particular item of research, then you select a different item to research, and the process continues again. You can only have a single research topic active at any time, and that research topic only applies to the faction you currently have selected. So if you're playing as, for example, the Soviet forces, you will only earn research points for the research topic you have selected as the Soviets. If you then switch over to, say, the Axis forces, then you will only earn research points to whatever Axis research item you have selected. Same thing if you were to switch over to the US and British forces and the Japanese forces. There is no crossover. You can't research something in, say, the Axis research tree and be able to use that thing on, say, the USSR or the US and British forces or the Japanese forces. It's only within that one specific faction. And by me saying that, you can probably already tell where this is going, but oh, don't worry, it gets worse. Now, starting out at the very beginning of the tech tree, it will cost you 5,000 research points to unlock the most basic of items. The next step up from that is 20,000 research points. The next up from that is 33,000 research points, then 46,000 research points, and the very first things you will unlock in Tier 2 are 60,000 research points. The amount of research points you earn depends on your performance in the match, as well as whether or not you have any boosters currently active, or whether you have the premium account enabled. We'll get there, don't worry. But without any kind of boosters going, you can expect to earn about 2-ish thousand research points per match as long as you're not playing absolutely horribly. So while it might take you 2 or 3 matches to unlock the very earliest things in the progression, the rate at which you unlock things slows down dramatically after that, and it only gets slower the further you get into the progression. As if that weren't enough, let's say you do manage to get to the very end of the research tree and you've unlocked everything for a given faction. You might think to yourself, okay, now what do I do with all these leftover reserve research points? Can I convert them into silver and use that to buy various things in the game? Can I switch that over to a different faction so I can accelerate the research there? Nope. They just sit there. I guess if the developers ever add something else to the research tree, you can use them on whatever that thing is, but otherwise, you're just going to be collecting research points and not be able to do anything with them. As if that weren't enough, you can't simply start using whatever it is that you researched whenever you finish the research project for it. First, you have to buy it with silver, but that doesn't actually buy the thing that you're wanting to use. Instead, that purchases the ability to purchase the thing that you just finished research for. And just in case that caused your brain to short circuit, let me repeat it. You have to complete the research project with the research points, then purchase the ability to purchase the thing that you just researched using the in-game silver. And then, after you've done that, you can actually purchase the thing you want to use in the game using the in-game silver. This is regardless of whether it's a gun or a vehicle. If it's something that comes with a squad attached to it, then you just get the squad immediately, and that will come with whatever the thing you just unlocked is. But if it's something you already unlocked the squad for, then you have to purchase the ability to purchase that particular item, then you need to purchase that particular item per soldier that you want it on. This probably sounds utterly ridiculous to you, so let me go ahead and give you an example of how this would work. Let's say you've unlocked the M1 Garand rifle, and you want to equip your entire rifleman squad with it. Let's say that you've gone through the progression of that rifleman squad, and you've gotten the ability to put all 9 soldiers in it. That means that in order to get the M1 Garand equipped for every single one of your soldiers, you would need to not only finish the research project for it, but then you would need to purchase the ability to purchase M1 Garands for your various squads, and then you would need to purchase 9 M1 Garands, 1 for each of the members of that squad. And then you have to go into their squad menu and specifically equip each individual soldier with it. You have to do this for every single soldier in every single one of your squads. Each squad is at minimum 3 soldiers, and at maximum is going to be around 9 soldiers like that rifleman squad. As if that weren't enough, even just having the squad in and of itself is not enough. You need to purchase the additional soldiers that you want within that squad. Each soldier is going to cost several thousand silver. There are multiple tiers of these various soldiers. Most of the classes only have tier 1 through tier 3 soldiers, whereas the assaulter class also gets tier 4 and tier 5 soldiers. And as you complete the various research projects, you will unlock the ability to purchase these higher tier soldiers so that you can go into the higher battle tiers with just straight up better soldiers. Oh, and that's not enough either, by the way. Whenever you enlist each individual soldier, that's going to cost you several thousand silver per soldier. Then you need to spend another several hundred to several thousand silver to equip that soldier with whatever you want to have them equipped with. And then there's the matter of every single soldier in this game having completely randomized perks and perk points. You see, you have 3 sections of perks that you can apply. There's mobility, there's health related, and then there's weapon related. And each soldier, whenever you enlist them, just has a random amount of points in each of those categories, and they'll start with a different selection of perks that are completely at random. You have no control over it. And then you have to just fill out whatever perks you can afford to fill out for them so that they have additional passive bonuses. Things like regenerating stamina, which is what you use when you're sprinting far more quickly, or being able to regenerate health more quickly when out of combat, or being able to reload faster, or have lessened recoil, or throw grenades farther, or mantle objects more quickly, or something along those lines. And while some of these perks are only marginally useful because they're just slight bonuses, some of them are much more substantial. For example, that stamina regeneration one that improves your stamina regeneration rate outright doubles the speed at which you regenerate your stamina. So not only do you have to pray to RNGesus for your matchmaking, but you also have to pray to RNGesus whenever you're enlisting a soldier to make sure you don't end up with one that has barely any perk points that you can spread around to things that are actually useful and doesn't start with a bunch of crappy perks. It's almost like playing a damn gacha game, but guess what? it gets worse. Because not only do you have soldiers at various tiers, not only are they randomly assigned perks and perk points, but remember that the classes and the squads are locked behind research. So you start the game off with a vehicle squad, a recon squad, and a rifleman squad. And that's it. No engineers, no medics, no machine gunners, no radio operators, none of the things that are actually really important for your team to have. Just riflemen, snipers, and vehicle operators, more specifically ground vehicle operators. Now sure, you can unlock medics quite quickly because that's one of the 5,000 research point options at the very beginning. It's the first submachine guns you get. Same with aircraft, because one of the first research options you have for the 5,000 research points is going to be an aircraft. But then there's engineers, which is one of the 20,000 research point options. And as for radio operators and machine gunners, well, those are 60,000 research point options because those aren't available until Tier 2. Better hope you not only like using, but are also quite good with those bolt-action rifles because you're going to be stuck with them for a very long time. And quite early on, you find out that the squads are set up in a particularly frustrating way. It's not so much an issue with the rifleman squad because everybody's a rifleman. Same with the vehicle squads because they're all going to be the same vehicle operators, and same with the medic squad because everybody in that squad's going to be a medic. But when you look at the recon squad, you notice that only one member of the squad is a sniper and the rest are just plain old riflemen. You see, whenever you get a squad that has specialized soldiers in it, whether it's machine gunners, radio operators, engineers, anything like that, with the only exception there being the medic squad when you unlock it, only the first member of that squad is actually going to be of the type that you expect that squad to be. So, for example, you unlock the machine gunner squad. You think to yourself, cool, now I'm going to have a bunch of guys running around with machine guns. No, you're going to have one guy running around with a machine gun, and the rest of the members of that squad are all just going to be basic riflemen. At least until you've leveled up that squad quite a bit and unlocked the ability to put additional members of that type in the squad. That's right, you can't just have a full squad of, say, engineers until you've leveled the living crap out of the engineer squad and unlocked additional engineer slots for the engineer squad. Now I can understand some of what they've done with this because there are sometimes opportunities to put slots for other types of soldiers in the squad. For example, with the rifleman squad, you can unlock a slot for machine gunners or anti-tank gunners or one for radio operators or something along those lines. With those, it's, well, still annoying that you have to go through the level grind to actually unlock those slots, but at least it's just one soldier in that squad that's giving you some additional capabilities on top of what that squad is already composed of. For specialty squads, recon, machine gunner, radio operator, engineer, etc., it makes absolutely no sense to have to unlock additional slots just to have that squad full of the type of soldier that you would expect it to be full of. I mean, think about it this way. When you start out playing as the engineer squad and you've only got one engineer in the squad, if he goes down, then you are no longer able to fulfill the role that that squad is intended to fulfill, and it just becomes a really small, crappy rifleman squad. The same is true for any of these squads where you are limited to only having one of that particular soldier type at the start. And when you unlock those additional slots for the soldiers of the given type, of course the game doesn't just give you another soldier of that type that you can fill that slot with. Instead, you have to go and enlist another one using the in-game silver currency, pray to RNGesus for the perk situation, and then you have to spend silver to equip them, and the cycle just is going to continue until eventually you've managed to complete enough of the level grind to fill out the squad with the type of soldier that you want it to be filled out with, and equipped them accordingly. Oh, and as if that weren't enough, each soldier has a star level from 1 to 5. You'll get each squad with the very first member of it being at the very least 3 stars, and all the other members will be a 1 star. And the higher star level they are, the more perks they're going to be able to choose from. So of course you want to have maxed out star level soldiers, and the only way you're going to be able to do that is by leveling up the squad that you get for that particular soldier type, and selecting the soldier level upgrades to be able to get higher star level soldiers. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck with only star level 1 soldiers for that particular type, even if you do continue to fill out the squads with those particular soldier types. Oh, and extra bonus points here. Whenever you get one of those slots in a given squad that'll allow you to include soldier types that are not normally of that squad type, for example with the rifleman squad being able to have machine gunners or AT gunners or whatever, you can unlock those slots before you get access to the squads themselves. And you might think to yourself, oh cool, that means I'll be able to enlist a particular soldier of that type for this squad. No, you need the squad unlocked first. So I have a couple of squads in my repertoire that have a slot unlocked for radio operators, and I can't put them in the squad because I haven't unlocked the radio operators yet. So that particular upgrade is completely useless until you've unlocked the squad type that allows you to recruit soldiers of that given type, and more importantly, you still need to level up that specific squad first before the soldiers are going to be anything other than star level 1 soldiers. That's right, they don't separate individual soldier class leveling from squad leveling. They're all bundled into one. So if you want your machine gunners, for example, to be higher star level than star level 1, you need to level up the machine gunner squad and specifically invest level up upgrade points into the individual class leveling part of it instead of the squad leveling part of it. And then on top of that, you can upgrade the weapons as well, but you can only do it through this squad upgrade system. So if you want to upgrade various weapons so that they have better stats than the initial baseline versions, then the process goes as follows. First, you unlock the squad that has access to that particular weapon. Let's say you've already got that unlocked. Now, in order to unlock the ability to upgrade that particular weapon, as you're leveling that squad up, you need to go over to the Weapons tab and start putting upgrade points into the upgrade tree for that specific weapon. It's by each individual weapon, by the way, not as a general category. And if it's a weapon you haven't unlocked yet, then you need to complete the research project for it. Then you need to purchase the ability to purchase that weapon through the in-game silver. Then you need to purchase however many examples of that particular weapon you want for whatever squad you're equipping it to, and then you can upgrade them on an individual weapon basis. So of course you can't just buy the upgrades for one specific, say, Car 98 rifle and have those apply to every Car 98 you get for your squads from then on out. Oh no, no, no. You have to get the Car 98 for each individual soldier you want it to, then upgrade each individual example of those Car 98s to be all of the exact same point. This means that in addition to the research grind and the level grind, there is a silver grind. So how much silver do you earn per match? Well, if you're lucky, you're going to be looking at maybe 200 to 400 silver per match. A soldier costs 3,000. You can see where this is going to, can't you? Weirdly enough, as slow and obnoxious as the research grind gets, the silver grind is far worse. The only thing that offsets it early on is that you have a bunch of achievements that you can unlock that'll give you, say, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 silver per achievement, but you only unlock those once. From then on out, you have dailies, weeklies, and sometimes event quests to give you additional amounts of silver, but you're still going to be earning it at such a ridiculously slow rate that you're probably going to be barely scraping by on silver throughout most of the progression. That is, of course, unless you break down and do what all of this is deliberately designed to push you towards, which are all of the real money purchases. Now, I will start with the least egregious out of all of these, which is the cosmetic stuff. I don't think anybody really has much of a problem with a free-to-play game selling cosmetics. However, the way Enlisted does it is just unforgivably awful. So let's say you want to customize the appearance of a particular soldier. You want to give them a different uniform, helmet, pants, that sort of thing. All of these purchases have to be made using the game's premium currency, which is Enlisted Gold, which is of course done to help mask the actual prices of the various cosmetic items, but is also done because it's more difficult to refund in-game currency than it is to refund direct purchases. But anyway, the exchange rate of Enlisted Gold to US dollars is $1 for every 100 Enlisted Gold. pretty comparable to most other free-to-play games and any other game out there that's using a similar kind of economy. And by the time you've finished customizing the soldier the way you want it to look, you've paid the equivalent of about $6 to $8 worth of enlisted gold. So let's say you complete that, and then you go to apply that outfit to all of your other soldiers. You find immediately that you cannot do this, because Enlisted forces you to buy the cosmetics for each individual soldier. And remember what I said about the squad size. If you're customizing, say, your rifleman squad, and we'll be generous here and say that you're paying $6 per soldier to customize their outfits, that's going to be a grand total of $54 worth of enlisted gold to customize one squad. But oh, it gets better, because that only customizes that one squad for one particular set of maps. You see, the maps in this game are broken down into 6 different campaigns. There's the Pacific War, Battle of Stalingrad, Battle of Berlin, Battle of Tunisia, Invasion of Normandy, and the Battle of Moscow. And while the equipment loadouts will carry over for all of these, cosmetics do not. You have individual cosmetics for each individual campaign. So not only do you have to pay for each individual soldier of each individual squad, but you also have to do it for every single front of the war that that particular faction is battling in. So take the Axis, for example, who fight in the battles of Moscow, Tunisia, Normandy, Berlin, and Stalingrad. To fully customize the cosmetics of a full rifleman squad for all of those battles would cost you $270 worth of enlisted gold. And again, that is for a single squad. Oh, and as if the squads weren't enough, there's also the cosmetic purchases for vehicles, in case you want to customize those as well. And by the way, all of this only applies for a single faction, out of 4 factions in total. And frankly, I don't even want to think about the ridiculous amount of money it would cost to completely customize your armies for all 4 of them. And remember what I said just a few moments ago. These are the least egregious of the real money purchases in the game, because at least cosmetics are completely optional and don't affect the gameplay. That's not the case with the other real money purchases. The first is the thing that they tend to shove in your face an awful lot, which is the premium account subscription. You pay for the premium subscription in amounts of either 20, 60, or 180 days for $6, $13, or $24 US respectively, and that doubles your rate of research point, squad, and soldier experience gain, and it gives you an extra infantry squad slot as well as an extra vehicle squad slot. Normally, a free-to-play player only gets 3 infantry squad slots and a single vehicle squad slot, so they can only have a tank or an aircraft. They can't have both, whereas people with premium accounts can have both. Now, that's certainly a bit annoying, but the extra squad slots aren't that big of a deal. The massively increased research point and experience point gain, on the other hand, is pretty obnoxious. Because that's just the developers deliberately designing the game to be an absolutely miserable grind in order to push people into paying them for a premium subscription so that the grind is slightly less miserable. But here's the funny thing about the premium account. It only improves research points and experience point gain. It does absolutely nothing for your rate of silver gain. If you want to get more silver, then you either just keep playing the game to get the pitiful amount of silver that it gives you, or just spend real money and buy big packs of silver to bypass the silver grind entirely, because of course they offer packs of silver for real money. And as if all that weren't enough, they also have premium squads and premium vehicles that you can purchase that are fully upgraded right from the start and have access to things that you simply cannot get in the regular progression. Now, thankfully, most of the squads and the vehicles are really just side grades compared to regular progression stuff, so they're not really any better or worse. In fact, in a lot of cases, they are actually slightly worse than the regular stuff you unlock. And they are still beholden to the tier system, so you can't just jump into a match and suddenly somebody's premium battle rating 5 squad is going up against your battle rating 1 rifleman squad. But the key word there is most, because there's one squad in particular that I can think of off the top of my head that has a pretty significant advantage over pretty much everybody else, and that is the US Paratrooper squad equipped with Thompsons that have 100-round drum magazines. That is a full 50 rounds more than the drum magazine Thompson you can unlock during the regular progression, and it's arguably the best submachine gun in the entire game. And what's even more frustrating about that particular squad is that it's a paratrooper squad, and all of the paratrooper squads were only available to free players during an in-game event some time ago. If you didn't play the game during that event and unlock them during that event, the only way you can get those squads is to purchase them with real money. So an entire gameplay style of being a paratrooper and being able to parachute drop into maps is locked behind a paywall. Not only that, but they have some of the best weapons in the entire game, and they are $40 US each. Just in case you were concerned about mishearing me there, I will repeat that. $40 US each for paratrooper squads. And if you look at the rest of the premium squad purchases that you can make, which includes the premium vehicles I might add, you find that the prices for these various squads and vehicle squads are just downright insane. The cheapest premium squad pack in the game is $20 US, and the prices only go up from there. When you get to stuff like the paratrooper squads, you're dealing with $40 US. And when you look at the Sherman Firefly tank squad, it's $45 US. Again, for a single squad, in this particular case a vehicle squad, but still a single squad. You are paying full game prices for. You could buy entire games for the price of a single squad in Enlisted. It is utterly absurd. And as if all of that weren't enough over monetization, it has a battle pass. Because of course it has a battle pass. It's a modern live service title. They all have to have battle passes now, apparently. Well, the only thing they don't really seem to have in the game is loot boxes, but that's just a matter of time. Apparently they're planning on putting loot boxes into the game eventually, they just haven't gotten around to it yet. It's all just utterly bewildering and downright infuriating to see what this game has on offer, because you can see where if they refined the mechanics and they balanced the game out better, then they might actually have something worth playing there. But the egregious over-monetization and the constant pushing of the player to purchase things instead of dealing with the absolutely obnoxious free-to-play grind makes it abundantly clear that the developers' priorities are almost exclusively on the money grubbing and not on actually producing a quality game that people will want to keep coming back to. And don't get me wrong, I understand that video games are a business and that a developer needs to make money off of their game. And in a free-to-play game, that means it's going to be microtransactions, subscriptions, that sort of thing. But the way they've set up the monetization in Enlisted is just downright predatory. It may not be outright pay to win, although it does come dangerously close to being like that with the likes of the paratroopers with 100-round magazines for their Thompson submachine guns, but they have set the entire game up to be an absolutely miserable grind for free players and a very slightly less miserable grind for people who pay for premium, and they are just going absolutely hog wild on the whale hunting with the cosmetics and the pricing on all the squads and things like that. And that will definitely come back to bite them, because while something like, say, War Thunder doesn't really have proper competition in the market, so they have a more or less captive audience. Enlisted doesn't have that luxury. This is a combined arms World War II shooter. If you want to play one of those that's actually worth playing, there are quite a few on the market right now. The one that immediately comes to mind is Hell Let Loose. I've got a review on that if you're interested. There's also Postscriptum, although it got renamed into Squad 44. I haven't gotten around to that one, so I can't vouch for it myself, but it's out there. There's also Easy Red 2, another one I haven't gotten around to yet, but it's out there. I mean, hell, I would argue that Battlefield 5 is a better value proposition as a combined arms World War II shooter than Enlisted is, and Battlefield 5 was a complete disaster on launch. Supposedly they've improved it since then. I haven't gotten around to trying it out again to see if they have, but supposedly they've improved it, and it goes on sale pretty often for fairly cheap, so it's still a better value proposition than Enlisted is, even though Enlisted is a free-to-play game. Because at least Battlefield 5 doesn't force you to grind for 20+ hours just to unlock basic gameplay features, let alone the potentially hundreds of hours it will take you to grind through a single tech tree in Enlisted. And even if you're someone who doesn't want to spend any money at all on a video game and you only look at the free-to-play space, there are far better options out there for free-to-play first-person shooters. They're pretty much a dime a dozen these days, and I certainly can't think of any that have a grind anywhere near as egregious or monetization anywhere near as egregious as Enlisted does. I mean, even something as over-monetized as Overwatch 2 isn't as heavily over-monetized as Enlisted is. It's depressing. If the developers in Gaijin Entertainment want this game to survive long-term, they need to vastly overhaul the entire progression system and the game's economy, because as it stands, it is just completely unacceptable. And honestly, there's nothing that really sums up the developers' need to completely rethink this whole thing than when they tried to launch this game on Steam. You see, launching a free-to-play game on Steam should be a no-brainer. You launch the game, you have account linking or something along those lines, and you gain access to the vast number of players that Steam offers you compared to having to go specifically to their website, download the game, and create an account, and so on and so forth. But while it should be a no-brainer, the developers, Darkflow Software, and their publisher, Gaijin Entertainment, had the incredibly brilliant idea to launch their free-to-play game on Steam only as a $20 US purchase. You couldn't just install the game and start playing it as a free-to-play game. You had to pay $20 US to get basically DLC starter pack thing that they were calling Enlisted Reinforced. They tried to pass it off as some sort of early access version, but it went so poorly that they ended up pulling the game entirely from Steam and having to post an apology, which had the extra bonus points of including an AI-generated picture of a sad-looking cat that was wearing an army helmet. I know that sounds utterly ridiculous, but that's what happened. Eventually, they did bring the game back to Steam as a free-to-play game like they should have in the first place, but frankly, that doesn't matter. You only get one opportunity to launch your game on Steam, and they absolutely blew it. Sure, since they've re-released the game on Steam as a free-to-play game like they should have in the first place, they did get an influx of Steam players, but it's hard to say just how many people they missed out on because they screwed up that initial launch. And if that's the depths to which their greed and short-sightedness sink, then just think about what that means for the future of this game. A free-to-play combined arms World War II shooter has plenty of potential, but with the way Darkflow and Gaijin are currently handling this game, I don't see that potential ever being truly realized. And while it is entirely possible that the developers in Gaijin will prove me wrong on that and will completely turn the game around at some point, given what I've seen of Gaijin handling War Thunder, I'm not gonna hold my breath on that. And that's more or less everything I have to say about Enlisted right now. It's entirely possible that they'll push some updates later on down the line that will dramatically improve things or make things dramatically worse, who knows. And if a kind of dramatic overhaul update ever happens, I might take another look at the game and make an updated video on it. But suffice to say, in its current state, I can see where buried deep underneath all of the myriad problems the game has, there might be a decent core in there somewhere. But to get to that core, to get to that kernel of fun buried in there, you need to put up with an absolute mountain of BS. It is still ultimately a free-to-start game at the very least, so the only thing you would really be spending by just giving the game a try is the bandwidth and your time. But between that grind and constantly getting purchase this thing, purchase that thing shoved in your face at every conceivable opportunity, I just advise you to spend your time and money elsewhere on something that does actually respect your time and money. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed the video and found something useful out of it, because this one ended up being way longer and way more involved than I thought it was going to be going into it. If you like the videos I make, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. If you can't afford to or don't want to, that's fine, I understand, but the option's there if you're interested, and every bit really does help out. You'd be amazed how even $1 a month can help out. Thanks again for watching. I'm going to go ahead and get back to work, and I will see you all in later videos.